powered by Riverside.
That intro. We're gonna have to figure
Right.
something else out. It's so long and so
Very,
awkward.
but that's all right.
Hi, I'm Sarah. This is Daniel. You guys all know us as Authors Chaos. Yes. So Daniel, have you been?
Oh, not bad. Busy. Finishing up stuff for master's degree for the next couple weeks. So
Oh, you're like in the thick
yeah,
of it then.
right into up to the beginning of May. So
gotcha. Any exciting news about Origins?
yeah. I actually got back the paperback design today from Perky, and it was missing a slight thing, so he's going to fix it really quick and shoot it back to me. But plan on uploading that tonight, and then hopefully getting author's proofs here really soon, and publishing after that to make sure everything's perfect. So
That's awesome.
yeah, thank
Congratulations.
you.
I'm so excited for
Yeah,
you.
I can't believe I'm that far.
I can't wait. I can't wait till I'm that far. Like I'm so excited. Like I just had Perky actually tell me that he'd be willing to do my cover, which is huge, right? Like he doesn't have to. He gets to select like the people that he does work with, and when he emailed me back, he said that you, me, and Alaya are three authors he's really glad he knows, and it was just nice to have somebody who's like worked with the two of you to where he knows like I'm not playing, right? Like I'm super excited to work with him and his art, and I've just been stalking his Instagram page for like the last 2 weeks.
He does really good work.
He really
and he's
does.
very thorough, so I think you'll be very happy when you get yours.
Well, today, let's talk about writer's block.
Yeah.
Because for like 3 weeks, I literally would sit down at this dadgum computer and have nothing. Like,
I can understand
zilch.
that.
Like, not even a character, like, as crazy as it sounds, talking to me about how they feel about what's happening to them. Like, literally nothing. And I told Davey the other day, I was like, I'm going to have to go to the woods. I'm going to have to go talk to Daniel and a lot. I don't know. I have to do something. So, like, how do you deal with writer's block when you get in that place where you just have nothing?
Well, honestly, and I think we need to throw a disclaimer on this. Neither one of us are doing writing as a career level thing to where it is what we make our living off of. And so our advice may not be perfect for everybody or even perfect for most people. But
hashtag fact.
Because I do writing because I enjoy it, because I want to tell a story rather than just to sell a book or to make a living. A lot of times to deal with writer's block, I just take a step back and step away from it for a while and kind of just go about life and hope that it will come to me in a moment.
I get that.
For a lot of people, if they're using this as a source of income, it's like, okay, I can't step away for 3 weeks at a time while I have writer's block. I think deep down, writing is a form of production, and I think if you're forcing production, it's really, really hard to make that happen. So to combat that, if you're not able to produce something, you're probably going to be consuming other things instead. And I think that the consumption of other art, whether that be through music or other books or TikTok or whatever you're reading, whatever you're doing, can help a lot with that. And I think a lot of the time when I listen to like music and stuff, that's when my ideas tend to flow better.
Gotcha. I literally had a moment where I needed to write. It's a very important chapter where a lot of things happen that kind of put in perspective like why my character is acting the way she's acting. And then kind of like digs into her personality. And I knew a certain way that I wanted to speak on that and portray her, because portraying her a certain way sets her up to look like she's actually a villain and not a
Hmm.
heroine, right? So I was hung up on the fact that like I could write her I could write her the way that like turns her into a character that you don't really enjoy,
Yeah.
because she has flaws, because that's part of her magic, part of the thing that makes her her, but it's a flaw that like a lot of people would think, well, wow, this character, I can't
Yeah.
stand her. And there's a way that you write it that like, okay, this is actually like a puzzle piece to her personality. And I sat down yesterday, and I had I was at work because I work full time. I was at work, and one of my customers came in and he was like, "You remind me of a person who's super super nice but can be mean when the situation
Hmm.
calls for it." And I had that moment, right, where I was like, that okay, that's like that's what I need to be able to portray. Like she is this thing, but she's also full of
Hmm.
this because of things that have happened to her. So it the minute he said it, and he was just joking with me, he jokes with me all the time. The minute he said it, I was like, I know Lilac's personality. Like I know what I have to write. And I got home and was able to like write out the whole interaction she has where she actually gets to come out and say, I'm angry. Like, I'm mad at everything that's happening to me. Like, what is happening
Hmm.
to me? So it was cool to just have somebody else say something and my brain just kick off of like, okay, cool. Like I can actually write this out. Like I can do the
Yeah.
thing. Um have there ever been days where you've sat down with every intention of writing and you get at the computer and you literally can't think of anything to write? Like you're just looking at it like I'm a fraud.
Yeah. Yeah. A lot of the time when I sit down and write, it's because an idea has popped into my head. But there'll be times when I have started into a chapter or something and I know the basis of where it's going to begin and where the characters are and all that. And so I'll sit down and I'll go to type, but I can't find the words that I'm looking for to use to express the
Hmm.
situation or the emotions that character is feeling. And I figure that if I'm having to force the writing of it, if I'm having to force myself to sit down and say, okay, I've got to get this chapter and I've got to finish this, I've got to finish that, my writing tends to not come off organically when that happens.
Right.
Um, and so that's usually when I'll take a step back and say, okay, I need to find something else that I can put into my brain that isn't going to just be nagging at me.
Right.
And I find a lot
Right.
of times um, when I'm dealing with the monotony, the minutia of life and stuff, that's when I can sit and my brain can wander and I can find the path that I'm looking for to finish that
Hmm.
writing down. And then I'm typing in my notes app what I'm thinking. Oh, all of a sudden I've got these lines that need to get written down. Um, but I
Right.
think a lot of it is finding time to turn off the world around you and find
Hmm.
just a place where you can sit down and think on the stuff without interruption. Um,
Right.
you hear stories of Albert Einstein trying to figure out the theory of relativity and working at a patent office because it was so mind numbing that he was able to
Uh-huh.
process through that and find those thoughts amongst himself with just doing things that did not require him to be producing constantly. And that's what I mean. If you are forcing production, if you are saying, I have to produce, I have to produce, I have to produce, you end up running into a wall a lot of times. That's when you need to slow down and say,
Right.
okay, I need to take a step back. This will come to me. Take a break. Don't let it stress you
Mm-hmm.
out, because at the end of the day, if you're not enjoying it, writing is not going to be a good time to be dealing with.
Right. It's just
I mean,
not.
just plain and simple.
It's just not.
And I think,
No.
and I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt.
No, you're
I
fine.
think
Go.
that when we sit down and write stuff that we enjoy, you tend to have people enjoy it a lot more. You can feel when stuff is
Right.
forced, and you can sit down and you could crank out an entire chapter and say, okay, my gosh, I made it 50 pages into this, and then go back a day later and say, this is complete garbage because it doesn't
Stop.
feel right.
Right.
And there's nothing wrong with that. You can go back, and nothing is set in stone until that book hits shelves, right? And so you can go back and correct that stuff. If you think you need to get something down, get it down. And if it doesn't flow right when after you're done, go back to it and fix it later. Because you can always go back into a
Right.
chapter and correct it, you know?
Right. Right. Um. So, I had told you that this week had that guy say something. I actually found me what I'm calling a beta reader. So I have Cassie editing grammar and
Mm-hmm.
all of that good stuff, and she's sending me notes on things that are confusing to her. But I found someone who was willing to like read it and then ask me questions that she has that could potentially be
Yeah.
plot holes. And I didn't realize how important she would be until I sent her my second chapter. And she was like, okay, I have questions. And I was like, shoot, like, I have time. Like, I can change whatever you think needs changed, or I can add things in to the later chapters to kind of
Yeah.
explain certain things. And she was like, well, why why is she just blindly following him like off into the woods to like this realm she's never even heard of? Why is she doing this? But her questions were questions that like, because as the writer I know
Mm-hmm.
all the things, I just
Yeah.
write. But to whoever's reading it, if I never explain why she blindly follows, or if I never explain why, like, that she had some like knowledge of these creatures, like in folklore or in fairy tales, like she'd
Mm-hmm.
heard of them. If I never explain that, then there are going to be people who are like, I have no idea who fae are. Like I have friends who are like, what are fae? I have no idea
Right.
what that is. I know what they are because I've read books about them, I've read folklore about them, things like that. So when she was like, hey, I don't really know what a fae is, and if I found out the way she found out, like I would have questions about like, what are you? Are you ancient? Like, can you explain it to me? So I was able to go back in that chapter and like in the conversation that my character has with her husband, like insert questions and answers, and it actually made the interaction beefier and it made it
Mm-hmm.
better because she was asking questions that a real world like person would ask of like, so you've been lying to me, like
Mm-hmm.
explain yourself. So it was finding having somebody to ask those questions kind of kick started that, where I was like, okay, I can have deeper meaningful conversations between her and her husband. Thank you. Pizza. I can have my characters have deeper, more meaningful conversation if I treat them like they're actually people, like they're deep, right? Like so it was that thing for me where it kind of unblocked the moment for me of like, okay, she needs to have like, they share a life, they've been married a long time, they're going to have deeper conversations than someone that's been married
Mm-hmm.
3 years, 5 years. They've been married 19 years, like they've lived a lot of life together. They're going to ask hard questions of each other, like that's just all there is to it. So having somebody else to like put those questions out there in the
Mm-hmm.
editing put me in a place to be able to have those deeper conversations. And it's crazy how that having somebody else read it and go, wait a minute, I'm confused, this is what I'm confused about. So I that really helped make my conversations where they're not just shallow
Yeah.
conversations. They actually have a lot of meaning. So, um, I guess my next question is, what's the weirdest thing that's ever broken you out of a writer's block? Like, can you think of one thing that was like, I have an idea?
Um, I don't know. The oddest thing I can think of is um, probably um, I don't know. It not really break me out of writer's block, but I know like when I'm searching for metaphors or similes, trying to beef up the way something is explained.
Hmm.
One thing that has stood out to me before has been like picking up Kyrie and realizing that, oh my gosh, this child is 4 years old and all of a sudden she's heavy. Um, it popped into my brain that in one scene in my sequel book, a shield falls on the head of somebody that these people are chasing, and they knock him unconscious and drag his body back to their camp and are interrogating him. And uh, the line popped into my head of, "You dummy! She dropped a shield the size of a small child on your head. Of course it hurt." And I'm like that is a fun little metaphor that popped up just because of some little thing that happened in everyday life. A lot of the
Right.
time, like I said, I I run into writer's block, and it will be when I haven't in a minute because I haven't written a new chapter in 6 months. Um, of
Yeah.
writing down my book just because it's been in a completed state for a while, except for small edits here and there that Cassie had recommended.
Yeah.
But you had mentioned finding a beta reader, and I think that it's always a good idea to have someone else to bounce ideas off of, even if it's not just your editor, because
Hmm.
Cassie's over here looking for errors in your grammar or things that just make absolutely no
Right.
sense. But she's not
Right.
continuously reading the story to read the story. She is trying to
Right.
find problems that you can fix.
She's
Exactly.
editing.
And so I think finding a beta reader, and I didn't, but I think finding a beta reader is a really good idea. Just because
Hmm.
when you're writing, you get into this stream of consciousness and you're like, okay, I know where point A leads to point B to point C to point D, and then all the way down this line in this web of directions. But every person is not privy to your thoughts and machinations when
Exactly.
you write that stuff down. And I think that being willing to say, okay, I need an outside perspective. I am not the world's greatest writer. I'm probably not even one of the, I'm not probably not even the best writer. I need someone else to say,
Your book is
hey,
good.
um, what is going on here? Because what you just said makes absolutely no sense. Um, because like I said, what makes sense to you might not make sense to somebody else, or you may just be writing yourself into a corner that you might not realize unless someone from the outside says, hey, you said this back here and it actually contradicts points A, B, and C here. um, so
Right.
what about you? If you're popping into writer's block, what has been the strangest thing to rip you out of that block then?
Oh, so I'm currently writing. You said you haven't written in 6 months. I am like in the throes of it, right? Like sitting at work, and you and I just talked about this on Facebook the other day of like having an idea and just taking a piece of paper and like writing. I run into this really bad habit. I can't
Yeah.
stop once I start because I'm again in the throes of writing where when an idea comes, I just
Mhm.
start writing. And then I have to come home and I have to type it, which is fine and dandy, except my brain is like, we've moved past this. It's written, but it's not actually in the book, it's on paper. So then I have to go back and rewrite everything. But then in the middle of that, like in the middle of the ideas that were flowing at lunch or during a dead time at work, in the middle of that, of rewriting that, I go, wait a second, that doesn't make sense, but I can make it make sense if I add this
Mhm.
thing here. So, but in doing that, I've kind of created my own writer's block, right? Because I'm stuck then in having to rewrite a scene that I've already written, which puts a break on whatever ideas I've got flowing. The weirdest thing that's ever pulled me out of writer's block, where were we? We were at Jacob and Elias working on the fence. And Nova walked outside and she said, Davy, what doing? And Davy goes, I'm working on the fence. And she said, you should come play with me. And Davy said, I can't. I have to do this. And for whatever reason, in his voice, I heard my main character's husband say, I can't join you. I have to do this. And it pulled me out. But literally, her asking the question, Davy, what doing? Was the thing that like kick started this conversation in my head that I was like, wait a minute, I know where I'm going with this scene. Like, and I had sat in the middle of a scene far longer than I care to admit because again, I knew how I wanted the scene to go and I wanted to portray it a
Mm-hmm.
certain way. Um, and just a little background, they're trying to keep her safe um, from the villain, from the bad guys. And they don't want them to know who she is. So the queen is having to pretend like she doesn't like her. And I knew how I wanted that scene to come across. Like I knew how I wanted the interaction with her to go because she actually super loves Lilac. She just can't show it. Because if she shows it, then they know that she is truly the curse breaker and they
Mm-hmm.
have a problem. So I knew like there had to be an exchange between the queen and her son of like, she's not good enough. You need to stay here and send her home. So it kickstarted that conversation between the two of them of like, well, she's not as good as such and such. And then the prince is like, I can't do that. Like I love her. I have to do this thing. Like I have to be with her. So it was a cool thing to like have just a 3-year-old's conversation kickstart that thing and then crows. I was sitting on my back porch the other day and I saw these crows and I was like, I know where I'm going now.
You say that, and I run across. I I think a lot of it again just boils down to just consumption of an outside source of some sort. I mean, even
Mm-hmm.
the chirping of a bird in a tree might snap you into the thought of, oh, this is how I want this to go. And when you when you are consuming stuff, you're obviously taking in ideas, taking in aspects of the world around you, and pushing those through a filter. If you're like me, your imagination tends to run wild with the things that you hear or take in. And it always has. And I think
Yes.
that's a lot of where my stuff comes from. I remember vividly watching a PBS Eons video over terror birds, these 9 foot tall ostrich like birds that
Yes.
tend to pick animals up and slam them down until they're, putty. Um, Unalived, yes.
Unalived.
And I immediately thought I could use that. And so one of the forms that one of my animal companions, Charlie, tends to take is the form of a titanus or a terror bird, and so that is what he is in most of the time. And I think that you just gotta let the ideas flow from what you're taking in. Um,
Mm-hmm.
when
Oh
I
yeah.
when I talk about writer's block, it's often okay. Well, ideas just kind of come to me because I'm constantly daydreaming of stuff, and because I'm not a professional writer, I don't have deadlines that I have to sit down and say, "Oh, I have to get this down right
Right.
now." Except for the fact that it eats away at my brain if I don't put it down somewhere. I just sit and think about it all day long to make it perfect. Um, but
Yes.
I vividly remember even starting out being in Colorado, 2 years ago now, up in the mountains, and thinking that, oh, the air is really thin up here. Every time I move,
Mm-hmm.
it's taking more for me to get around than it normally would, and that ends up finding its way into the very first
Yeah.
chapter of my book where Sai wakes up,
Oh,
and
for
it's
sure.
like these things. It tends to be look for inspiration in the small things around you, and use that. And if it's complete garbage when it goes down, you can always change it. You know, I
Right.
think that
Right.
writer's
That's
block
right.
tends to boil down to the fact that we think if we put it down, then it's in the story and it can't be removed, and now the story's trash. And that's
Right?
just not the case. My book
No.
is running has run through its fifth revision now of different things. I mean, even from the beginning, my character's tome is based on Charles Darwin's On the Origin of Species, right? And so I thought,
Mm-hmm.
oh, that gives me this cool evolutionary ability. But starting out, it wasn't that. It was started from Thoreau's Walden, and it was from hearing stories of literally teaching my kids about Henry David Thoreau and how he lived his life in the woods. I'm like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, so I could have a loon as his pet thing. He'd have this little thing just walking around beside him, and I eventually couldn't
Yes.
make that work. I couldn't. I'm gonna make it work for somebody, I
Right.
promise, but not him. It's
Dana's
yeah,
like,
it's gonna
it's
be
gonna
somebody's
happen.
tome, but I'm like, this tome is a little bit too boring to be the main focus of this story. And so it ended up changing. I'm like, it has to be a bird. It has to be a bird. So it ended up changing to Darwin's finches, and then from there spiraling out into this full blown thing that Emily has read through now, and it's like I did not see it going that way. And so I'm I think a lot of writer's block, if you can help it, a lot of it is just to step back and let life take you where it's going to take you. But if you don't have that,
Right.
I guess the only other option is to go off and consume something, hoping that it will spark your imagination
For
into
sure.
writing something, if that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. That makes 100% sense.
Hmm.
So, my last question that I've got, because I just went through this actually a week or so ago and I freaked out. Have you ever thought something was going to go a certain way, like a certain interaction or a character's growth arc, and then all of the sudden something happens as you're writing and you're like the characters start telling you
Hmm.
what's going on, right? Like they start taking over. And that I sound insane when I say that, but that's the only way I can describe it. Has it ever gone from like, okay, this is the arc I see, and then they've kind of told you, no, this is the actual like thing
Hmm.
that's happening?
Well,
Has
yeah,
that ever
Sarah,
happened to
Charlie
you?
doesn't have a loon anymore. Um, but the the
Daniel.
no, I think a lot of the times when we write stuff, we tend to go from beginning to an ending immediately. And I'm sure, I don't know if you write that way or not,
Hmm.
but I have an ending in mind that I want to take place. And I say, okay, this is the
Right.
final scene that's going to occur. This is the climactic point. How do I get there? And then you
Yeah.
tend to allow characters to walk their way through the world and interact with things how you would think they would interact with them. Um,
Right.
and yes, there are a lot of times that you take a heel turn when you have a character going and doing certain things, and all of a sudden it's like, no, 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 that interaction doesn't make sense because of their personality type. And
Right.
then it has spiraled
Right.
so far out that you're in a completely different destination than you were going to be in the beginning. I completely agree with you in the fact that you kind of just have to let your characters live. I mean, you can't act, you are,
Hmm.
at the end of the day, you're the person writing down what they have, and you are the one
Right.
deciding what actions they take, but you cannot force them into boxes if you haven't set them up to be in those boxes in the first place. And
In the first
so
place.
if
Right.
they aren't going through it and living it organically, it yeah, I think you could tend to get really crappy writing out of that. Um
Right.
but yeah, I remember vividly thinking that, I mean, this my story as it stands now is nothing like what it was going to be to begin with. And it all stems from the
Right.
fact that I wanted my side character to be this oblivious, kind of happy go lucky guy. And I couldn't
Mm-hmm.
do that with some of the things that I wanted, that my initial thoughts were of him becoming this very powerful person very quickly. And it's like, no, that doesn't work, or him
Mm-hmm.
knowing what's going on all the time, or knowing certain situations. And, um, but yeah, I have seen stuff take a turn from time to time that I just wasn't expecting.
Right.
And I think that's a good thing, though, to allow that natural outgrowth. You
Right.
know, I can't think of any
Right.
specific examples.
Yeah.
Again, it's been a while since I started writing Origins.
6 months,
And I
right?
mean, I've written one of my first
Right.
two chapters of Odyssea, which is the second book. And
Yeah.
that was, I mean, I've been writing that in the past couple months, but that stuff is extremely raw.
Right.
It's not refined, it's not well thought out. It's
Right.
just, okay, I need to get this down and start a pattern.
Right.
So
I
when
get
I
that.
say, has stuff taken a turn that I don't expect, I don't remember, except for the fact that my story is not what it was initially. And it's not what I
Mm-hmm.
expected it to start out being. But I'm very happy with where it took off, because I kind of let it just walk itself into that position,
Right.
if that makes sense.
Right.
So what about you?
Right. Oh, that makes complete sense. I had this naive thought that this was how she was going to be. This was how she was going to live. This was how she was going to save whatever. And this was how the first book was going to end so that we could build up to the second book, right? And then she actually met Tariq, my cleric. And my whole plan was here. And the conversation with Tariq went here.
Fair.
And it became this super beefy, like it's
Mm-hmm.
so good, right? So I literally had this moment where I'm writing dialogue between her and Tariq as she's learning about herself, okay? She's learning about who she is. He has like all the information about her parents. They have the lore
Mm-hmm.
behind whatever. And I typed a sentence that was Tariq talking to her, and I had to stop and I sent a message to the group chat with your wife and Alaya, and I was like, y'all, I don't know what just happened in my book. And I told Davey, I said, oh my gosh. And he goes, what? I said, I did not see that coming. And he goes, you're writing it. And I said, I did not know. Like, I
Mm-hmm.
did not know this was a thing. Like, this is now a thing. But this happening enables me to set up more
Yeah.
story further down the line. So it happened for a reason, right? So, like, the information that she is given about her parents and about what happened to them and about her own personal ties to this realm, without that, there would be no reason for her to go on to
Yeah.
the last book because she would have no ties to that last book. So it was one of those things where, like, even in my mind, where I was super surprised that that thing happened, and I was like, I literally am blindsided by this. Like, I never imagined to find this piece of information out. Like, I found it out the same time
Mm-hmm.
Lilac found it out. But in the long run, it gives her more reason to do what she has to do. And it also sets up two other characters for further growth, where without it, they would remain very static and there would be no reason for them to change. So while it surprised me and it wasn't what I had in mind, it is the exact thing that I needed because it sets me up for Dead of Winter and then the next two books. So yeah, it was completely insane to sit down and try to write that scene and then it go completely sideways on me. I ended that chapter and I looked at Davey and I was like, that's not what I thought was gonna take place. Like, that's not it. Like, that's not it at all.
Yeah.
But it's good. Like, it's all it's all good things, and it set me up to be able to see a clearer picture for the ultimate end goal. And you said something earlier about like the things that are happening in your world. And I've been thinking about this, and maybe we should talk about this next time, what it's like to build a fantasy
Yeah.
world. Because let's be real, a lot of my first book is is world building, is like setting up this way of life that most people, like, if you don't know anything about Fae, you wouldn't know, right? How did you tackle, I guess this will be a question for you to think about, but how did you tackle creating a world where these characters exist and exist not necessarily cohesively, right? Because you have to have a
Right.
villain, you have to have a problem, but like where they exist and it's normal to exist in this way. Or like my character in part of the book, she talks about a little witchy book like tea shop that's in one of the neighborhoods, and come to find out like the two ladies that run it are two sisters that live in the Fey realm. So like building that world where these things live together, like
Yeah.
world building, is so crazy. It's
Yeah.
crazy. So let's talk about that next time. Like how to set up your fantasy world, cuz I think that's an interesting, like I think that's something both you and I are currently dealing with, and even going into your next book, you're going to have to talk a lot more
Yeah.
about your world and about how it's set up and things. And I know I'm going to have to, right? Because I have to talk about a whole nother
Right.
court. But like just yeah, so next time join us, we're going to talk about building a fantasy world and how it's not as easy as it sounds, because it's not.
All right.
Oh, but thank you guys for joining us. We appreciate it. We are so glad that you listened to us. My name is Sarah. I go by SF Rogers. My book, Execration of Autumn, should be out by the fall of this year. If not, it'll be out in spring.
Yeah,
And
I
Daniel?
am Daniel Golden. My pen name is DL Golden, and my first book, Origins of the Dreamcatcher series, should finish production here at the end of the month. In about 2 weeks, it should be available for order on Amazon. So be on the lookout for that, guys.
Awesome. Check us out. Find us on Facebook. We are under Authors
All
Chaos
right.
on Facebook.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Bye.